Here's the recording. Feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Silverberg, and I'm a doctoral extern at Fielding Graduate University, being supervised by Dr. Alexandra Barnett at Milestone Psychology. And I recently completed a qualitative study with Dr. Barnett related to tailoring, adapting, and modifying PCIT for New York City families. We're examining emotion coaching within PCIT at Milestone Psychology specifically, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looked like and what sort of questions I was curious about that led to us developing this qualitative study. So just a little bit of background information. So we know that PCIT has been studied internationally across many different populations and has been found to be an extremely effective intervention for behavioral and emotional difficulties. And we also know that there are several treatment adaptations that have been developed: PCIT for older children, PCIT ED, and PCIT CALM. And these have all been created to better support the needs of families from a variety of different populations. And we know that adaptations, typically, each one of them focuses on a particular feature of the family or the individual. However, more research is needed to understand the variety of differing needs across families and how we can tailor PCIT to support all of these different families, because we know that it is so successful across the board. While not all of the current PCIT adaptations track the same fidelity standards as standard PCIT, PCIT International does report that the defining features of PCIT are maintained as treatment is expanded to meet the needs of more families. So when there are adapted treatments like for older children or PCIT CALM, as well as other tailored versions, these have been proven to have and maintain that fidelity that is so important to PCIT. And more PCIT adaptations are beginning to track their interventions with integrity more formally when we think of those fidelity sheets that many of us use in our PCIT work. There is limited research on understanding rationales and examples of tailoring these adaptations to meet additional needs of families. And so initial studies have shown the effectiveness of the adaptations themselves. It is important for further research to support the fidelity of these different protocols and practices. So the goal of this study was to really understand and explore the use of tailoring traditional PCIT as well as adaptations like those mentioned previously in support of families at Milestone Psychology, specifically with regards to families needing support with emotion regulation. Because tailoring treatment does require flexibility in the fidelity of PCIT in order to meet the needs of families and receive comprehensive treatment, we were really interested to understand what clinicians' thoughts are around maintaining that fidelity while still tailoring treatment as needed. So clinicians at Milestones using PCIT with their families were interviewed on their clinical use of tailoring versus modifying or an adaptation of PCIT to support the families that they work with. We were able to complete interviews with 4 clinicians around the use of emotion regulation coaching within PCIT, and we queried specific ways in which clinicians have had to tailor, modify, or use an adapted form of PCIT. Clinicians were also asked to share their opinions on whether these modifications, adapted forms of PCIT, and ways that they've tailored treatment, in their opinion, whether they uphold the fidelity of PCIT. Once we completed these interviews, an inductive approach to thematic analysis was conducted in order to identify themes around clinicians using a tailored approach, an adaptation of PCIT, or a modified approach to emotion coaching within PCIT, and across responses related to whether they feel these uphold fidelity. So in terms of results, there were 3 key themes that emerged across these interviews. The first result we like to call pump up the volume. So this was the big theme that emerged. Clinicians really acknowledged that they tailored treatment in terms of both time and intensity. So clinicians reported that additional sessions were needed for families to build on both CDI and PDI skills when they were tailoring treatment. Additional practice around labeling emotions and feelings were also needed to support the validation of the child's feelings, as well as show improvements in caregivers' own language around emotions. Additional sessions were also used to kind of pump up acclimation to receiving praise, both labeled and unlabeled, as well as validating emotions and ignoring inappropriate behaviors. All of this was done because oftentimes these children and families were not used to these, so additional sessions were really a helpful thing here. The second theme that emerged in our interviews were supports and resources. Clinicians stated that the PCIT listserv, direct supervision, and PCIT protocols and manuals, so these adaptations like PCIT CALM, PCIT ED, and PCIT for older children, were providing them with a lot of support needed to tailor, modify, and use adapted interventions with specific families where emotion coaching was used. And then the third theme surrounded this fidelity debate. So tailoring treatment by the clinicians interviewed was reported as keeping with the fidelity of PCIT, given that the ways they were using this could be coded as neutral talk, and ignoring inappropriate behaviors was seen as a part of CDI and PDI mastery. Clinicians also reported that fidelity of the use of adaptations of PCIT, so those three that I mentioned earlier and others, were upholding fidelity as well. Interestingly enough, clinicians did report that certain modifications of treatment did not uphold fidelity if considering the PCIT fidelity forms that we use in standard PCIT. In terms of the discussion around this, the themes that came up from these interviews highlight the importance of emotion coaching strategies across families within our particular clinic, as well as how these strategies have supported the clinical work with these families. Across the board, clinicians interviewed identified that these strategies often result in tailoring treatment and agree that tailoring upholds fidelity. Clinicians also agreed that they use a multitude of resources through PCIT International, listservs related to PCIT, and colleagues to uphold fidelity of treatment. However, clinicians did disagree around fidelity of treatment when adapting treatments to various populations. Some agreed that this upheld fidelity, others didn't. An understanding of one's experience using emotion coaching will help identify potential areas for fidelity research in the future. And differences in beliefs around what constitutes upholding fidelity of treatment is also pertinent to note in future areas to explore and understand related to this, because clinicians may have different understandings of what that looks like. In terms of limitations, there are limitations that come with qualitative research. There is a limited sample size, as well as generalizability being limited due to a small sample size, clinicians working in the same practice, and also collaborating during a weekly PCIT meeting in order to discuss and problem solve around some of these questions that we're asking in this particular study. Qualitative research also doesn't allow for statistically significant results or point to causality. However, this study may provide support for further research on this topic, as it points to a trend in how we understand and approach adapted forms of PCIT, as well as tailoring and modifying a standard form of PCIT. In terms of directions for future research, understanding the use of emotion coaching within PCIT can be a really helpful framework for tailoring interventions specifically towards children and families that need additional support with emotion coaching. While there were different beliefs around fidelity that were upheld in this particular study, future research might expand on this to examine specific areas in which fidelity is or is not believed to be upheld when utilizing various adaptations of PCIT. And especially frequently, clinicians have begun to use PCIT via telehealth, and this has been ongoing for a while. However, over the past several weeks, we know there's been an expansion of PCIT via telehealth means. So understanding the challenges or novel experiences that come from treatment provided in this way will also increase understanding of fidelity of treatment, as well as novel ways in which clinicians can modify or tailor treatment or turn to adaptations of PCIT to meet families' various needs. And with the ongoing pandemic at present, the stressors this has placed on families' daily lives can exacerbate negative emotions. Understanding how to navigate these emotions effectively for all family members is crucial in any PCIT work with a family in crisis. And so this work is so crucial at the present time because it adds to ways that we will need to support our families moving forward as we're engaging in PCIT with them. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. References are listed here. And I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our poster.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We definitely are seeing a lot of this extra piece being added and used and discussed in, as you said, listservs and presentations. It's, you know, going to be one of the topics at the conference. So I think it's very interesting how these conversations are happening, expanding, ongoing, and where they might be heading towards. I wanted to see just your thoughts on that conversation, that disagreement with the clinicians about the fidelity piece to PCIT in incorporating emotion coaching when also trying to adapt and be flexible for other situations, such as an older child or something else in PCIT. I just wanted to see
Yeah,
what your
I
initial
think
thoughts are.
it was very interesting because all of our clinicians felt it was crucial to tailor and modify as needed. And I think clinicians that were more familiar with standard PCIT or having been engaging with it for a longer period of time also acknowledged, while those needed to be done, that they didn't consider themselves actually doing PCIT then if they weren't upholding the fidelity based on that fidelity form. Where other clinicians who were maybe newer to PCIT or had maybe gone through the training in more recent years had said in the interviews that they still felt they were upholding fidelity because the goal was to support the family, and this was a modification or a way in which they tailored that met the needs of the family. And so I think it became sort of a nuanced difference in terms of, you know, how stringent each individual was in upholding the fidelity of standard PCIT based on that fidelity checklist that so many of us use, especially initially as we're working our way through PCIT and learning how to conduct it with fidelity and efficacy. I think there's a difference there. So it makes a lot of sense when you think about the background someone is coming from, and very interesting. And I think the reason I like qualitative research so much is because it gives us a framework to at least consider some of these trends as you then delve into what would a quantitative study look like. And I think it's very interesting to consider, you know, when people are utilizing fidelity, how are they ensuring that they're upholding that? Are they using a checklist? Are they just saying that they've gone through all the steps in a particular session? You know, what does that look like for each person? And I think it
Definitely.
differs.
Yeah, definitely. That's something to consider, I think. And I think the piece with the years involved in PCIT is also crucial, right? Because that can be just being new to the treatment or having been in that world and in that framework of
Mhm.
fidelity for so long that could be influencing how one views all of these different considerations and nuances, as you
Sure.
pointed out. Well, thank you so much for your
Thank
presentation.
you.
I'm going to stop recording.